Good day, fellow champions of inclusion. I am A. Ron, and this is the Inclusive Dad Podcast, where we explore inclusion and make it practical. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, rate, or review the show on your favorite platform. We truly appreciate your feedback and would be honored if you shared the podcast with friends and family who might benefit. If you want to support us in our mission, please click on the link in the show description. Today I have a very special guest, Tiffany. Can you pronounce your last name?
Yeah, Tiffany Yu.
Tiffany Yu, sorry. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I met Tiffany online, I think Instagram. She has a book coming out, the Anti-Ableist Manifesto. You can see it behind her. It comes out on October 8th, I believe, correct? Is that when it comes out?
Yep, October 8th.
So I joined her book launch team, and then I'm excited to have her on my podcast today. So I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, and thank you for being part of the book launch team.
Yeah, for sure. So why don't you first tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So again, my name is Tiffany Yu. My pronouns are she, her. And today, many of you know me as the CEO and founder of Diversability. The best way to think of us is we're kind of like a disability employee resource group that exists outside of a company. And this comes based on my own personal experiences of starting Georgetown's first ever disability student club to then being actively involved in Goldman Sachs's disability employee resource group and co-founding Bloomberg's disability employee resource group. So kind of just been following disability communities all throughout my career, whether it was my full-time job or not. And my entrance into this space and why I'm so passionate about it is based on my own lived experience. So at the age of 9, I was involved in a car accident. My dad was driving. He unfortunately passed away, and I acquired a handful of injuries, including permanently paralyzing one of my arms, known as a brachial plexus injury, and then breaking a couple bones in one of my legs that would leave me as a temporary wheelchair user for about 4 months, and much later being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD.
Thank you very much. Before the accident, did you have any exposure to disability at all?
I didn't. That's a good question. That's the first time I've been asked that question. But I also think it goes to show, I think and hopefully it's changing now, but I think at the time I wasn't exposed to a lot of disabled characters in books.
Right.
And I guess most of my consciousness around it were like, I don't know, the villains in movies and TV shows.
Yeah. The reason I asked that question is, so my daughter, Cecilia, she'll be 22 next year. We found out at 3 months old, she had epilepsy, was having seizures, so diagnosed with epilepsy, cerebral palsy. She uses a wheelchair to get around. So I don't ever recall hearing the word disability, seeing anybody in a wheelchair at all growing up. So I didn't really know much about disability, any of that stuff until, she was born, and we're in that space. So it's just, I kind of like to find out like how people have, how they were in it before or not. So yeah, makes sense to me, because it's one of those things too where if it doesn't happen in your life or you're not exposed to it, you don't really think about it. So that's kind of interesting.
And I have a chapter in the book called Why You Should Care About Disability. And I think it's a good question for both of us to think about what our introductions to wanting to care more about disability were. And it was, these not only a lived experience, but someone you love. But I do mention in the book that all of us are pre-disabled, and eventually, if we live the full, beautiful extent of our lives, we may join this wonderful disability community. And my hope is that maybe there will be some people who don't think that they're connected to disability who pick up this book and realize, hey, I really want to prioritize accessibility because I just want to make things better for if/when it's my time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a great point. And like, there's a lot of great stuff in the book. And I've done 2 TEDx talks. My second one, I talk about this. There's a statistic, and I've forgotten it completely, but yeah, the chance of every person acquiring a disability or needing assistance from somebody else before they die, the number is, I mean, if you live just to like the average age of, life expectancy, it's, I don't know, like around 50, I think. But if you, like 10 more years, it jumps quite a bit higher. And then if you live to like 90, it's like three quarters or more of us will need help with something in our lifetime. So yeah, it's, if you haven't been affected by a disability or you don't have a disability yet, the chance of you either acquiring a short term or long term before you die is pretty high. So it's very
And it's
important
so
to,
common now, right? One
yeah,
in four in the US
yep,
adults has a disability. So even if we don't think we know anybody, we probably do.
right,
And I think that the more of us, I'm finding more people in my network talk about living with ADHD, or
yep,
they have dyslexia, and even a lot of newly disabled people with long haul COVID. So those
right,
are all anxiety and depression. Those are all different types of disabilities as well. That
absolutely,
I think for a while people didn't consider those as disabilities.
for sure. So can you explain briefly? You could probably talk for hours, but could you explain briefly what ableism is?
Yes. So the definition that I use of ableism is when we devalue someone based on the way their body and or mind works. So a simplified version of that I think is the definition that most other people use is discrimination on the basis of disability. Part of why I use that definition when we devalue someone based on the way their body and or mind works is it causes you to really reflect on what are all the areas that I'm devaluing someone. Am I devaluing someone, uh, questioning their intellect based on their gender or the way that they speak, or the clothes that they wear or their body types? Like those are ways that sexism and ableism kind of intersect as well. So as we move to what is anti-ableism, it's what actions and practices and beliefs can we adopt that make it so that we're not devaluing people. And I will say ableism is a system of oppression. It's so embedded within our society. So so now we have a book, probably a whole bunch of books that people can read to
Right.
unlearn and educate themselves about what we can do when we meet a disabled person and either pattern interrupt any assumptions we might make about their experiences.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the book I've been reading. I'm not finished, but it's very thought provoking, very good information. And then at the end of the chapters, you have like, do you call them like reflection questions, probably, where you have questions to kind of help you dig more into your own thoughts or your experience with what's in the chapter. So it's very well. A lot of things that I didn't realize that are we just say, just phrases that we learn along the way that we say, that have some of that or have the ableism embedded in them, that you just, it's kind of a, slang, you say it and then it's like, whoa, that actually, I now understand what that means, and yeah, I shouldn't be saying that. So it's very, goes into great detail and that kind of stuff.
It's great.
Yeah,
Yeah, and part of why I saw this Instagram post a couple of years ago and it said, ending discrimination starts with self reflection.
right,
And when I saw that, I said, self reflection, which is something I love doing, but it made me realize that, here in the US, we've had a policy in place that has technically protected our rights as disabled people for over 30 years.
right,
Yet we still have a huge disability employment gap. We're
yep,
seeing bias, conscious and or unconscious. And it made me realize, okay, it's going to be this combination of policy plus hearts and minds or attitudes around disability that's going to create lasting change. So we can put all the policies in place, but again, back to this definition of
right,
ableism, if we don't fundamentally believe that disabled people are our peers,
right.
are full, valuable, worthy human beings simply because they exist, then we can have as many policies as we want. But if we don't believe them, they're just going to be performative and fall flat.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great point. Just bring it, talk. I mean, and also there's some stuff in there about just not seeing the representation, and then people just not talking about their disability, because that we need to talk about it, be comfortable talking about it and talk about it so other people are also, because just so my girlfriend, she hasn't been around a person with a disability to the extent she's been around my daughter since we've been together. So, she heard about ADA. Most people know about the Americans with Disability Act was passed in, I think, like 1990 or something like that. So it's been in place for a long time, and people, she's told me before, like, I knew there was a law. I just kind of figured since there was a law, everything was, there was fixed and all that stuff. But she's been around me and my daughter, and we go to places and that's not wheelchair accessible, or the doors in the back by the trash can, or these different things. And she's like, I had no idea that, I thought there was a law, it was all fixed, but I had no idea there was still these, accessibility issues years after the fact. So awareness is a huge piece also.
Yeah, and I not a lawyer, but my
Yeah.
understanding is that the ADA is also enforced through legal action.
Right.
And so I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it, but it also requires a lot of labor and
Yeah.
burden on a disabled person to decide, okay, like, is this something that I have not only the energy, but the means and resources and support to be able to take on,
Absolutely.
so that I can just have equitable access?
Yeah, for sure. And just from my experience with, accessibility for wheelchair stuff with my daughter, she loves music and concerts. So, we sign up, buy tickets, go to places, but I always ahead of time, make sure, everything's accessible. She can get in, because it's just not fun to show up to a place expecting to have a great time and then you can't get in, or something. Like, we can always get in. It's just you go in through like a back door. It gives you a whole different feeling for the event and stuff. So just, yeah, like you said, take that extra step, extra energy, to make sure you can participate when that stuff should all be taken care of ahead of time and not have to worry about. So for sure.
Yeah, I have this example in the book where I shared that a bunch of my friends were organizing an outing to go to a pottery
Yep.
class, and I reached out to my friend. I said, "Hey, do you know if they'll?" I've actually never seen someone with one hand at a pottery make
Sure.
pottery. Maybe I
Yep.
should search for that. So I reached out to my friend, and they said, "Oh, I don't know." So I reached out to the place where the pottery class was happening, and I asked them, and I didn't hear from them. And I said, in order to avoid like a weird situation,
Right.
because I'm sure you've encountered this, I've encountered this, I was like, I'm just going to opt out.
Right.
And it made me think about what are all the things we want to do that we opt out of because access wasn't made clear or
Right.
wasn't made available. Or maybe someone just didn't even respond, and maybe they were overwhelmed, but to not even hear, it made me
Right.
have to make the decision of saying, okay, I can either risk it and it might make people uncomfortable and then I'll have to leave, or
Sure.
I just stay home and miss hanging out with my friends.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you, or so it sounds like at some point you kind of made the decision to, start diversibility and the other things and go down this path. How did you get to that point where you wanted to, like, do things that made, take action and improve society? How did you get to that point?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting is diversibility started as a club, a student club. And I think what's interesting about diversibility's origin story is that I was not a disability advocate then. I was
Okay.
just someone who had a disability, who didn't think I knew other disabled people or felt really
Hmm.
isolated in my disability experience. And for the first 3 years of university, I had co founded a Taiwanese American club. And one thing I'll share about being Taiwanese American is I actually didn't identify as Asian or Taiwanese until I was 18. I think it had been so ingrained in me as the daughter of Asian immigrants to not draw attention to my race, to try to, I don't know, our path to success was through assimilation or
Okay.
erasure or our anchoring to whiteness. And so anyway, I co-founded this. I met a couple other Taiwanese American students during freshman orientation, and we created this club together. And what was actually really fascinating was that for the first time, I found a sense of community, pride, learned more about Taiwanese history, identified as Taiwanese, culture, just like
Mm-hmm.
all these things about my Taiwanese identity that I didn't really know about. And so after having done that, I knew how to start a club. And I kind
Sure.
of looked at, hey, I have this disability identity. I have this disability. I have not really talked about it as much. I generally hide my arm. What's interesting is my injured arm, my injury is most severe in my hand, so I have very limited movement in my hand. Uh, for a long time, I used to try to shake people's hands with my paralyzed hand, um, and then I don't know when the shift was, but there was a shift, and then I became what I call a very confident left-handed handshaker. But I
Mm-hmm.
bring that up because I think I just grew up trying to I guess anchor myself to more of a non-disabled identity.
Sure.
Um, so fast forward to now senior year of university, this Taiwanese American club is flourishing, and yet here I am feeling a lot of shame around the all of the um, everything that happened around the car accident.
Yep.
So not talking about my dad's death, not talking about my disability. So I said, you know what? I started this Taiwanese American club. I'm curious if anyone would join a disability club. And I actually started seeding that idea with a few people. The first was my roommate, who was my co-founder of the Taiwanese American Club, and she said, "You should do it. I'll support you."
Mm-hmm.
And then I talked to I reached out to two other groups of people. One was someone who was really passionate about disability studies, was part of the staff, and I reached out to two students who I knew had disabilities, asking if they would kind of be the
Mm-hmm.
foundational group of this club. Um, I was told that creating a disability club was too radical. Um, at the time, this is 2009,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm stubborn. And when we started the Taiwanese American Club, we also got pushback, those 3 years prior. So I had been used to
Right.
people kind of bashing the idea. So I said, you know what? I'm just going to try. Um, we're going to host one event. And if people show up, then maybe we're onto something. And if people don't, then we tried.
Sure.
So I hung these flyers up around campus and they said, there's this new club called Diversability. Email this email address. And my name wasn't on it. And I started getting emails to that email address from people I knew, but who had chronic illnesses or vision disorders that were not apparent. So I didn't know, who were
Mm-hmm.
curious about this club. And they kind of became those founding members. We originally called ourselves the Diversability Working Group
Okay.
because we were too small. And then we continued to grow from there. So I will say it wasn't until until Diversability kind of grew a little bit that I
Mm-hmm.
started to look at where are my areas of power and privilege, or where do I have some circles of influence
Yep.
to try to carry this conversation forward. And the more disability advocates that I met through Diversability, the more I think I started to stretch my own comfort zone of not only what I was willing to talk about in terms of my own disability, but how I wanted to educate and make my disability experience and hopefully others more accessible to
For
people
sure.
who may not necessarily engage.
That's great. Yep. I mean, my podcast is relatively new. I think I'm at like 14 or 15 episodes published, but early on, when I was talking to people or when I was on other podcasts, just I had people with multiple times just by you sharing your story about you and your daughter and your experiences has made it okay for me to feel okay to share my stories. So there is a lot of power. It sounds like you starting the club, getting it out there. Other people who, like you said, you didn't know, they had a disability, or they were searching for another community or some people to join with that were, similar to them. So that makes sense to me. That's awesome.
Yeah. And what's really fun is, Diversability, where since that first iteration in 2009, we're turning 15 this year.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And I've been thinking a lot about
Sure.
2009 era and how hard it was to get people to join, to get anyone to join.
Okay.
And now, We do very little marketing. We have a Facebook group. It's growing by about 20 people a week. So people are finding our community.
Yep.
And I hear from our community members every once in a while that Diversability was the first disability community they joined. And I love kind of just being that landing place for people if they are seeking community.
Yeah, that's great. So one of the questions I ask all of my guests is what is their definition of inclusion? So what is your definition of inclusion?
So my definition of inclusion is being able to show up at a place and not have to ask for permission to be there. So it kind of reminds me of your example of the concert or my example of the pottery class.
Yep.
I just want to show up,
right,
and not have any friction in terms of this is a term that is used in the book. It's from Mia Mingus called access intimacy. But to me, that's my version of inclusion is I don't want there to be friction for how I arrive. And I just want to feel, I guess, welcomed and just there.
Yeah. That's great.
I'll share one other very quick. I know it's a quick podcast, but
you're good.
I recently got invited to the White House, not humble brag, to celebrate the 34th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Yep.
So they invited a lot of disabled people, a lot of my friends that I've gotten to know over the years. And one of my friends is uses a motorized wheelchair or a motorized scooter and took the train for the first time and just experienced like getting on the train, figuring out how to call an accessible Uber, like so many pain points along the way to come, ironically, to a celebration of the ADA.
Right.
And you know, this year marks 27 years that I've been disabled, but when those friction points come, it's like digging into this wound that hasn't fully healed just yet.
Yeah.
And then talking to my friend who, you know, is probably at least a decade older than I am and has known disability her whole life, that was still extremely frustrating and emotional for her to have to get re-traumatized in that way again. So yeah, just another example of where inclusion hasn't fully worked.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that makes my story about concerts, which is the one that comes to mind right away is we have it's called the Eagles, so it's a bar concert thing. Like 2 blocks from our house. We walked over there, went in through the front door, and where the concert was out in the parking lot, but they had it like a fence around it, so you had to go through the building and out the back door to get out to the parking lot. Well, you get into the building, you start going out the back door, and it's like a 6 to 8 inch drop off the sidewalk back there to the ground. So we get there, I'm like, how am I getting her out there? Well, their solution for that is to pull out like this handmade wooden ramp, which is barely wider than her wheelchair, that had like a hole in like the the sheeting on the top of it, and that was how she had to drive down that to get out to the concert. And it's like you're saying, just that experience of first you had to ask for it so they could bring it there, and then that's like what the word, like the word traumatizing is. Yeah, that is probably a more accurate word of how you feel for sure. And that's just, that's me experiencing. My daughter,
like secondary.
It's not even me personally, so yeah, it still does stuff, yeah, for sure.
Well, it still affects you as her parent.
Yeah. What was did you have any like aha moments when you were writing the book, like when you were doing research or anything, like stuff you didn't realize until you wrote the book or anything, like any aha moments?
There's a chapter in the book around overcoming non-disabled guilt. And I think that people's hesitation or their desire to, or their privilege to opt out of a conversation on disability inclusion is around makes people feel guilty. And as I was doing research, I learned that there is the type of guilt that leads to action. And then there's the type of guilt that I think most of us associate leads us to inaction. And so it's like, how do we find that balance that we're able to turn that guilt into action rather than inaction? But as I'm sure you've been reading, the book is well researched, I guess is the best word that I would use for it. I did tons of research, and part of what I'm really excited about with this book is I've cited TikToks and LinkedIn posts and Instagram posts, and we laugh, but I grew up, I became an adult, I became what I would call like a digital native as an adult. And I think the generation after us is kind of the first generation as kids to have access to all these devices. But we are so socially connected now. Disabled people are finding community online that I feel like this book was written during the social media era. Like, what does disability inclusion and disability advocacy look like during a period where we are more hyper connected than ever? But also the way that news and things happen a lot quicker than they did when I was growing up. But there are some things that still take time. So that's why I'm grateful that Diversability is turning 15 this year, because I have seen change, and it's made me realize that, okay, I'm not going to get the change tomorrow. But, in 2009, I would tell people that I wanted to start a movement around disability pride. And I got pretty much all confused looks because people could not understand how any disabled person could be proud of their disability. And now here in 2024, I'm seeing the president mention Disability Pride Month, states proclaim July as Disability Pride Month. Even if it still feels like it exists within the disability community, we're all celebrating disability pride together. We've got a disability pride flag. So, and no one's giving me strange looks. And maybe I'm not in those circles. So maybe I need to do some work to get to the places where I'll get the strange looks again. Or maybe there's been change. I don't know. I don't know who has changed, if I've changed or if society as a whole has changed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for sure, like I shared, like I didn't hear the word disability. Maybe I'm seeing it more now because it's the world I'm in. But I mean, there is a lot more, like you're saying, social media gets it out there. I mean, the disability pride. So I mean, it's probably a combination of a lot of things, but I feel like it's more talked about for sure than when I was younger. No doubt about it. That part of it for sure. So
I will say one other thing surprised me was that the word ableism, the first time it was used was 1981. So even though the concept of devaluing people's bodies and or minds, or discriminating against disabled people, or the mistreatment of disabled people has been around forever, there hasn't really been a term for it until the 80s, which to me still feels pretty. I mean, that's the decade I was born. It still feels pretty recent.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I was born in 77 and my brother was born in 81. So yeah, it's interesting. It's crazy. Yeah, for sure. Who's the most, well, I mean, I see a lot of your social media stuff. So you've met a lot of what I would consider famous people. Like, who's like one of the most surprising to you that you've been able to meet through your journey?
Ooh, that's a good question. Is this within the disability community or just in general?
I would just in general, like, or you can do both if you need to. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that question, but I will say that last year was the first time I ever got invited to the White House, and President Biden and Vice President Kamala took photos with everyone.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I actually think about that a lot because, and then I have another answer after that. But what I loved about that situation is that selfie for each of us took 3 seconds. And it made our day, took 3 seconds out of their day. And we now just are so excited that we have a selfie
Right.
with the president.
Yep.
So it's been interesting. Even this year, it was a lot more formal, and the president came out, made his remarks, and then went off. And in my mind, I'm just like, I'm never gonna do better than the selfie I got last year, and I'm okay.
You're okay.
But I will say, one person I met, I didn't have an in-depth conversation with him, but I got to do a very brief like photo op with Gary Vaynerchuk.
Okay. Yep.
And do you know Gary?
I know Gary V. Yep. Yep.
Um,
For sure.
and one thing I just really appreciated was he's so present when he's with you, and he just makes you feel good. I guess this is how politicians are too.
Yeah.
But I just thought about, here's someone who has so many different ventures going on. I got
Yep.
introduced to Gary Vee because my dad and I went to garage sales and would like
Okay.
look up
Yep. Yep.
look up things and look for a deal.
For sure.
But now he's, wrote a book on day trading attention and social
Yep.
media and getting onto social media. He's got the wine side. So anyway, he's got so many things
Yep.
going on, but yet he's still so present when he's with you. And I just love, and my hope is that I can emulate that. Because I don't know, you ever like go to an event and in some ways it feels like a who's who, and you just notice everyone is like looking at everyone else's name badges to see who else is there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, my hope is that whoever I'm talking to at the moment is the most important person I'm talking to, right? I guess it comes back to, again, like, I just want to embody even this idea of like anti-ableism. Like, how can I just value this person taking the time to talk to me, being so present, being there? I'm getting ready to do my first book event here in LA.
Yep.
And I've been thinking about, how when the author signs the books, like the person is talking to them at the same time. And I'm not that good at multitasking. And I'm like, am I just gonna scribble something because I can't listen to them and sign my name at the same time? But I'm sure it'll be fine, and I'm sure people will understand.
You'll just have to have our friend come over before that and just, hey, talk to me, and I'm gonna pretend I'm signing stuff and get better at it or something.
That's true. That is true. But I think I'm also trying to, I feel like there's a period of time where I felt like I was multitasking and like looking at my phone and listening to a conversation at the same time. And now I think I'm reverting back to, what does it look like to not have any devices that you can turn to at any period in time that has tons of information that you can endlessly scroll on for hours and just enjoy the meal or the conversation that you're in.
Yeah. So where did you meet Gary Vee at?
I met him. He was speaking at a conference called Your First Million Live. It was put on by Arlen Hamilton, who I had gotten introduced to her through a program that she runs called Backstage Catalyst, and she's actually mentioned in the book too. So you'll see a plug to Arlen. But I think she and Gary Vee had gotten to know each other over the years. She's a venture capitalist and writes a lot around investing in underestimated founders. And her focus is Black women, LGBT people, hopefully disabled founders as well. So that's where that happened.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've been listening to his podcast for a long time, and he had it's probably 7 or 8 years ago. He came to Rochester, Minnesota. I live about an hour from there to do an event, so I bought tickets, brought my kids there, and he walked right past us down the hall. And I wish I would have tried to stop him to get a picture, but he was right within 5 feet of me. So it was pretty cool.
That's so cool. Well, next time he does the Minnesota stop. And that's the special thing. Like, I've always lived in big cities, but I do talk to friends who live in Tulsa, or I have a friend in Bentonville, Arkansas, and they say like the reason why they love where they live is because they can always get tickets to the things when the concert that they want to go to. The seats are always good, and it's a different level of access than, I don't know, living in the City of Angels here, where there are there's a lot more activity going on.
What is one tip that you can share today to help the listeners be more inclusive? So not some, you're you have a book coming out. Normally I say not something they can buy or have to take a class, but what's one thing they can do to be more inclusive today?
I will share two scripts. One is, do you have what you need to fully participate? And this could be if you are hosting an event or a meeting. It's just a gentle way to ask people if they have any access needs. The second script is, let me know if you need any support. So what I like about that is, instead of asking someone who may have a disability if they need help, it's a statement so that that person doesn't have to engage with you if they don't want to. Because some people who have more apparent disabilities, the incessant offers for help they receive probably
Yes.
becomes a micro/macro aggression.
Yeah.
And then since I shared two, I'll share one more, which is, I guess just ask yourself if you are someone who creates content. And this is more of a simplified way to do it, but ask yourself, if I'm not able to see this, am I still able to engage? And if I'm not able to hear this, am I still able to engage?
Those are all great. I love all those.
That's why I
Thanks for
couldn't pick just one. And then I'm like, I wrote a whole book about it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. You ready for the last question?
Yes.
Do you like spam? Yes or no?
Yes.
You do? Yeah, that was
Yes.
quick. That was quick.
Oh, I've been really into I just went to this like Japanese restaurant recently, and they had this like spicy spam thing where it's like
Okay.
a piece of spam on some rice wrapped in. Have you seen
Yep.
that, wrapped in seaweed? And it
Yeah, I've
was
seen it.
so good.
Yeah, I've
So
never tried it.
I've been thinking about it a lot.
Yeah. I mean, so I live in Austin, Minnesota, is where Hormel is located, where they make spam, and there's a spam museum. So if you ever come to Minnesota, you can you can go to the Mall of America, but you can drive an hour-ish south, and you can go to the spam museum. So
Okay. Well, we're planting the seed for a book stop.
there you go. Actually, there's a very cool small bookstore in Austin called Sweet Reads, located across the street from the Spam Museum, and she gets authors in all the time. So I'm sure she'd be very happy for you to stop by. So
I thought you were going to say she gets spam all the time, and then that would have been even more incentive for me. But
there you go.
very cool.
You can buy spam in the Spam Museum's gift shop. So yeah. So yeah. Is there anything else you want to talk about that we haven't talked about so far?
No, I think that's great. I guess one question for you is, I'll close with a question for you, which is, what inspired you to want to join the book launch team, and how has your experience been so far? Mainly, you've just been getting emails from me, but we had a call earlier this week with the people who could join,
Sure.
and we did end up starting a little Instagram group if you decide you want to join that too.
Yeah, for sure. I saw you. I'm not sure exactly at this point how long I've been seeing you on like social media, but I just thought I've never done a book launch before. It looks like it's going to be a great book. I have a habit of buying books that just keep buying books. I need to stop buying and read them, all of them. But I just wanted to join something. Never done anything like it before. Just get the book, read it, share about it. Get the message out there, and it's so it's been a lot of fun so far, and I really have enjoyed it. So I appreciate the opportunity, and not only for that part of it, but having you on my podcast is part of it as well. So
yeah, that was a selfish question.
no, that's fine.
But the big news, I don't know if you saw it in the update, the book was recently just named Amazon Editor's Pick.
I did see that,
which was
good
pretty
job.
cool. Yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you.
What's the best place? Where's the best place for everybody to connect with you?
So the best place would be tiffanyyu.com. That will have a book page on it. If you want to join any events, there are some in-person and virtual ones coming up around the book. And then on there, you'll also find all of my social links as well. So if you don't want a book, you can engage with me on social media and find me there.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. To all of you listening, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Inclusive Dad Podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, rate, or review the show. Your feedback helps us connect with more champions of inclusion. Remember to share this podcast with friends and family who might benefit. If you want to support us in our mission, please click on the link in the show description. Together we can make the world more inclusive. Until next time, stay empowered and be a champion for inclusion.